The Emerald Tablets of Thoth The Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? Part 2. Here in Part 2 of this video series, we'll read, examine, and review information gathered from our second source about Maurice Doreal. Our second source is an article written by Charmaine Ortega Getz entitled, Maurice Doreal and His Brotherhood of the White Temple Awaited the Apocalypse in Colorado. Our source reference is posted on the westward.com website. Let's begin by reading the article. World War II was over, and the Cold War was just heating up when a metaphorical atomic age bomb burst in Colorado. The American science fiction community was still in an uproar over the Shaver mystery, the most sensational true story ever told, according to Amazing Stories magazine, a publication whose circulation had skyrocketed after it published I Remember Lemuria, a fantastic story purporting to be a memoir of the extraordinary subterranean world encounters of writer-artist Richard Sharp Shaver in 1945. The "Is this for real" controversy concocted by editor-in-chief Ray Palmer inspired Shaver mystery clubs to spring up around the country and fueled numerous letters from readers who shared similar memories, dreams, and alleged encounters with descendants of warring extraterrestrial races, the evil Darrow and the benign Tarot, who lived in the hollow earth. Life magazine called the phenomenon the most celebrated rumpus that rocked the science fiction world. One of those letters, published in the October 1946 issue of Amazing Stories, came from Dr. Maurice Doreal, the Denver-based supreme voice for the Ascended Masters, super-evolved human beings who live below Tibet. Doreal had recently announced that he was moving his Brotherhood of the White Temple from central Denver to rural Colorado to wait out the coming nuclear holocaust. Like Mr. Shaver, I have had personal contact with the Darrow and even visited their underground caverns, he now wrote. In the outer world, they are represented by an organization known loosely as the Black Brotherhood, whose purpose is the destruction of the good principle in man. The underground cities and caverns are, in the most part, protected by space warps, a science known to the ancients, but only touched on by modern science. I note that many are wanting to enter these caves. For one who has not developed a protective screen, this would be suicide, and one who revealed their location would be a murderer. He described the group that the Brotherhood represented as the White Lodge, or Supreme Council of the Ascended Masters. The Masters or Adepts do not rule. They guide and direct man in his spiritual evolution. Because so many have tried to make the White Lodge a supernatural thing, rather than what it is, a group of persons who have evolved mentally, physically, and spiritually ahead of the mass of mankind. Much misperception has arisen. It is the most coldly logical group I have ever contacted. Following his startling pronouncements, Doreal gave brief interviews to Time and Life magazines, then largely disappeared from public view, only to later resurface in his new Shambhala Ashrama compound near Sedalia, Colorado, where he awaited the post-nuclear resurrection. Maurice Doreal was born Claude D. Dodgen in pre-statehood Oklahoma on August 25, 1902, to Thomas D. and Alta Bell Dodgen. His father was a farmer and sometime day laborer, and Claude was the youngest of their 6 children. As with the children of most working-class people at the time, Claude's formal education was limited to elementary school. This did not prove to be a handicap. He later claimed to have had his first encounter with an ascended master at age 3 and another at age 12. He also said he retained the experiences of previous incarnations so well that he didn't need to be taught anything by the time he emerged as Claude D. Dodgen, spelled D-O-D-G-I-N, or Claude Dodgens, spelled D-O-G-G-I-N-S, which he also gave as his birth name. When I was born into this life, I had a full and complete memory of my past lives and incarnations, and I never had to study over again the forgotten things that most of us do. I did not have to learn to read and write. I did not have to learn mathematics or physics or chemistry or anything else, because in the past I had acquired that knowledge and had retained my attainments of the past, Doreal wrote, in personal experiences among the masters and great adepts in Tibet. The most precocious kid on the planet apparently kept a low profile about his early attainments. What they did prepare him for, he later explained, was a supernatural invitation in 1925 that took him from Wichita to Calcutta, where he was then guided to Darjeeling, and from there to the secret underground kingdom in Tibet, where the ascended masters and great adepts had their headquarters. There, he spent years studying esoteric knowledge before returning to Kansas as the anointed representative of the Great White Lodge to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Doreal would later explain his lack of passport stamps by claiming that it was actually his astral presence that had made the journey. A marriage license archived at FamilySearch.org shows that Claude D. Dodgen, 25, and Ruth Proctor, 20, both of Altus, Oklahoma, were married in Chickasha, Oklahoma on September 4, 1927, by the Reverend A. H. Owen, a Baptist minister. According to city directories and the 1930 census, from at least 1929 to 1930, the couple lived in Wichita, where they had a son and a daughter. Apparently, even Dodgen's great attainments could not be used during the Great Depression for anything more than employment as a clerk, a cab driver, and a salesman for the Kansas Brokerage Company. By 1931, the Dodgen family was living in Oklahoma City, where Claude worked as a department store salesman. By 1932, the Dodgens were divorced. Ruth married a man who adopted the children and gave them his own name. The 1933 Oklahoma City Directory listed Claude D. Dodgen's occupation as president of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. By 1937, Dodgen had moved his base of operations to Los Angeles, where he and the second Mrs. split up. A United Press story dated June 21, 1937, chortled about the cross complaints filed between the occult leader and his wife. Margaret charged Claude with cheating on her, and Claude complained that she denounced him in front of his disciples. The U.S. Census taken on April 1, 1940, found Dr. C.D. Dodgen living in Bancroft, Colorado, a now-defunct Jefferson County hamlet, at the Court Cottage camps on Morrison Road. He was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country, no place of residence by 1935. The person who described Dodgen to the census taker was his third wife, Sonia. She said that she was born around 1908 in New York and had 4 years of college education, which she also claimed for her husband. Colorado state records show that the Brotherhood of the White Temple was officially incorporated in Denver on April 11, 1942, as a religious organization whose stated goal was to impart religious instruction to its members and to all others who may be interested in its doctrines and teachings. The 3 officers of the required board were listed as Dr. C.D. Dodgen, Dr. Carib Ramos, and Dr. Kenneth Stahl. Booklets written by Dr. Maurice Doreal, Dr. M. Doreal, or just Doreal, and published by the Brotherhood of the White Temple, neatly typed, crudely stenciled, mimeographed on cheap paper, and stapled together, began to appear soon after. Doreal's The Emerald Tablets of Thoth The Atlantean also debuted about this time. He claimed that he'd simply transcribed the work as he channeled the denizen of Atlantis. In appearance, it was about as impressive as all of Doreal's other early works, though it's written in a far more enigmatic style, one that has gained some popularity on occult and metaphysical websites and forums. Doreal's stream of booklets divided into two lines: an informational series for the general public, available at an additional cost of between 25 cents and $1, that outlined various esoteric beliefs, and a teaching series that was designed for neophytes, enrolled paying students of the Brotherhood's Correspondence School. It's likely that Doreal borrowed his mystery wisdom home study model from the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, an organization founded in 1915 by Harvey Spencer Lewis. Thanks to Lewis's advertising talents, AMORC rose above competing Rosicrucian organizations to become a flourishing outfit by the 1930s, with large ads in national publications, especially magazines of popular science, science fiction, and mystery detective stories. To those familiar with the religion of Theosophy, founded by charismatic Russian Helena Blavatsky, Doreal's writings about the Great White Lodge and the Ascended Masters will seem curiously similar, if not an outright ripoff. Theosophy was a common launching pad for the multitude of seers, clairvoyants, mediums, white Mahatmas, yogis, gurus, and swamis who advertised in newspapers and magazines across America in the early 1900s. Doreal amassed one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries, over 30,000 volumes, but all he seemed to distill out of his studies was a long series of repetitive and poorly written, but highly imaginative, booklets on occult subjects, wrote Walter Kafton Minkle, who researched Doreal for his 1989 book Subterranean Worlds: 100,000 Years of Dragons, Dwarfs, the Dead, Lost Races, and UFOs from Inside the Earth. In the early 40s, Doreal's Symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States had detailed hidden meanings of the symbol that appears on this country's official documents and currency in a few pages, but the rest of the booklet was dedicated to the coming of the Avatar, chosen by the Ascended Masters to establish a new age of enlightenment. With uncharacteristic modesty, Doreal said that he was only to be the voice or forerunner of the Avatar, who will appear on May 2, 1956 in America. This is the day when the present Earth cycle closes and the golden age of the seventh cycle will dawn. In several booklets, Doreal warned of the Serpent People, a race nearly identical to Shaver's snake-headed Darrow, and a fantasy feature first popularized by Robert E. Howard's The Shadow People in a 1929 issue of Weird Tales. Like the Darrow, the Serpent People could shapeshift to look like humans. By 1947, M and Sony Doreal were established at 430 East 10th Avenue in Denver. At the same time, Rerub Ramos, a misspelling of Carib Ramos, Doreal's sometime partner and perhaps alter ego, since there's no real verification of his existence, was listed as living at 1600 Logan Street. That's the address of the William G. Fisher Mansion, a stunning edifice built in 1896 by a Denver department store magnate who died the following year. By the 40s, it was leased out to a variety of businesses, including the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Today, it's the home office of architect David Triba. It was from 1600 Logan that Doreal sent his missive to Amazing Stories, and also announced the imminent move of the Brotherhood to Sedalia. The Brotherhood wasn't the only thing that was moving. As public obsessions turned away from theosophy-ish exoticism in favor of the alarming possibilities posed by nuclear warfare, unidentified flying objects, and the Shaver mystery, Doreal's works began to shift focus too. In Mysteries of the Gobi, Doreal wrote of a civilization beneath the desert inhabited by a highly advanced, benign race similar to Shaver's Tarot folks, but with one distinct difference. Gobians were the real Hebrews who became priests to the Jews, but were not Jews themselves because Jesus was not of the Jewish race, but descended from the Gobians, who all had fair skin, blue eyes, and red or blonde hair. I had predicted atomic war years before it came, Doreal told the Rocky Mountain News in 1946. I saw atomic energy at work several years ago when the Dalai Lama of Tibet ushered me into the Great White Lodge, 75 miles below the Himalayas. By 1948, in Flying Saucers, an occult viewpoint, Doreal was warning that the Serpent People had disposed of Joseph Stalin, and now the Supreme Council of the Soviet is controlled by beings far wiser than they appear. It was time to prepare for the apocalypse. All it took to buy into Shambhala Ashrama and prepare for the coming Holocaust was $500 per person and a personality that would blend in well with the program. And if nuclear war didn't actually hit, Doreal said, the community could become a summer resort. Newspapers and magazines had a lot of fun with the cult, led by a baldish little man, as the United Press referred to him in March 1948, who claimed to have met the current Dalai Lama's predecessor and knew when atomic weapons were about to be unleashed. He was photographed wearing gold robes, seated on a silver throne that he claimed was previously owned by the ill-fated Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, and proclaiming the new Shangri-La in the Rockies to be the center of occult wisdom in the West. Shambhala Ashrama was finally finished in 1953. It included about 100 homes, a two-story house of worship, some barracks-like buildings, and a nearby cave where food could be stored for the long haul. The lead in the rocky walls of the canyon would protect residents from nuclear fallout, Doreal said. Newspapers reported that the community was moving in for a population of about 800 residents, all told, and then the Brotherhood slammed the door on press interviews and uninvited outsiders. In February 1953, the Post said that The Voice has issued orders that no outsiders are permitted to enter the valley except necessary workmen. That same month, a Wall Street Journal story reported that the leader of the cult predicts the attacks in May or August or September. But months and then years, including the formerly epic coming of the Avatar year of 1956, passed with no further public pronouncements from The Voice. According to Colorado state records, Doreal died on November 28, 1963, although the Brotherhood of the White Temple still does not acknowledge his death on its website. That site also doesn't mention Doctors Kara Ramos or Kenneth Stahl, or even Doreal's widow, Sonia. Once referred to as an attractive young blonde by a newspaper reporter, she disappeared after her husband's death, although her name continued to appear on Doreal copyrights for some years. Brief mentions in newspaper articles indicate that after a reported power struggle that led to a few folks founding their own metaphysical church, some of Doreal's followers took over the Brotherhood, which remains based in the foothills of the Rampart Range between Castle Rock and Sedalia. Although its facilities were never needed as refuge from a nuclear holocaust, Shambhala Ashrama did not become a summer resort. Over the decades, some of the homes were reportedly sold to outsiders, but the compound remains off-limits to uninvited outsiders. While the Shaver mystery continues to fascinate sci-fi fans and inspire TV shows, movies, websites, rock concert posters, and books, Doreal remains a little-known fringe player in a realm in which science fiction merged with subterranean world truthiness and metaphysical religion. The Brotherhood is currently managed by a board, represented by Diane E. England. Contacted for an interview regarding the Brotherhood, England declined, citing unspecified inaccuracies in previous newspaper and book accounts. I know Halloween is coming up, and that's why you want to do a story now. I'm not stupid, she said, adding that any Westward representative who appeared on Brotherhood property would be arrested. The Brotherhood's Facebook page is blank. Its website proclaims without citation that the Brotherhood is an internationally acclaimed metaphysical organization, but otherwise provides little information beyond Doreal's claim to be the voice and the promise of learning Bible-based mysticism by ponying up indefinitely for church lessons. An online bookstore sells Doreal's vintage pronouncements and the Emerald Tablets of Thoth The Atlantean in a far glossier binding than it featured in the early days. There is also a donate button on the site to enable a love offering to the Brotherhood. Now that we have finished reading the article, we'll take a look at a historical timeline of events that occurred throughout Maurice Doreal's life. In 1902, Claude D. Dodgen was born in the month of August in Sulphur Springs, Oklahoma. In 1925, Claude Dodgen claimed to have visited the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters in Tibet. In 1925, Claude Dodgen also claimed to have visited the Great Pyramid of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth. Between 1929 and 1941, during the era of the Great Depression in America, Claude Dodgen worked as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, and a department store salesman. Between 1930 and 1932, Claude Dodgen established the Brotherhood of the White Temple. In 1933, an Oklahoma City directory listed Claude D. Dodgen's occupation as president of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. By 1935, Dodgen was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country with no place of residence. In 1937, Dodgen divorced his second wife, complaining that she had denounced him in front of his disciples. In 1939, writing under the pseudonym M. Doreal, Dodgen published a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth The Atlantean. In 1942, the Brotherhood of the White Temple was officially incorporated in Denver, Colorado as a religious organization. In 1951, Dodgen relocated the Brotherhood of the White Temple to Sedalia, Colorado to escape the fallout of a nuclear holocaust. In 1963, Claude D. Dodgen died in the month of November, according to Colorado state records. Now that we have reviewed the historical timeline of events, let's do a summary and analysis of our source article at westward.com and review key points about Doreal's personal background and history. Maurice Doreal was born Claude D. Dodgen, spelled D-O-D-G-I-N, or Claude Dodgens, D-O-G-G-I-N-S, which he also gave as his birth name in pre-statehood Oklahoma on August 25, 1902. Dodgen's formal education was limited to elementary school. As Doreal, Dodgen claimed that he retained the experiences of previous incarnations so well that he didn't need to be taught anything by the time he came into his incarnation as Claude D. Dodgen. In his book entitled Personal Experiences Among the Masters and Great Adepts of Tibet, Doreal was quoted as saying, "When I was born into this life, I had a full and complete memory of my past lives and incarnations. I never had to study over again the forgotten things that most of us do. I did not have to learn to read and write. I did not have to learn mathematics or physics or chemistry or anything else, because in the past I had acquired that knowledge and had retained my attainments of the past." Over the course of his lifetime, Dodgen married 3 different women, had 2 children with his first wife, and divorced 2 of his wives. Claude Dodgen worked in several roles as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, as well as a department store salesman during the era of the Great Depression. Throughout his history, Dr. Maurice Doreal wrote, authored, published, distributed, and collected over 30,000 books, booklets, and pamphlets, resulting in one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries. According to Colorado state records, Doreal died on November 28, 1963. However, the Brotherhood of the White Temple still does not acknowledge his death on its website. In addition to Maurice Doreal's personal background and history, we will now review some of his claims, beliefs, and theories that we've read about here in Part 2. A first encounter of the curious kind. Maurice Doreal is said to have had his first encounter with an ascended master at the age of 3 and another at the age of 12. An invitation to travel to the hidden kingdom. In 1925, he claimed to have received a supernatural invitation to visit the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters and the Great Adepts, whose headquarters were located in Tibet. According to Doreal, it was actually his astral presence, not his actual physical presence, that made the journey to Tibet, where he supposedly spent years studying esoteric knowledge within the hidden underground kingdom of the Masters. While in Tibet, Doreal not only was to have spent 8 years studying esoteric knowledge before returning to Kansas, but also claimed that he had been appointed as a representative of the Great White Lodge and that he was to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. As an appointed representative, Doreal considered himself to be the supreme voice for the Ascended Masters, a super-evolved race of human beings that lived below Tibet. In his description of the White Lodge, Doreal wrote that the lodge was comprised of a brotherhood of spiritual adepts known as the Supreme Council of Ascended Masters. He stated that the Masters or Adepts do not rule, but rather they guide and direct man in his spiritual evolution. He felt that they were the most logical group that he had ever contacted. Doreal also felt that much misperception had arisen with regard to the Brotherhood, as many thought of the White Lodge as a supernatural thing rather than a group of people who have mentally, physically, and spiritually evolved ahead of the masses of mankind. The Avatar and the New Age of Enlightenment. Only a few pages of Doreal's booklet, Symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States in 1940, was dedicated to revealing the hidden meanings of the symbol that appears on this country's official documents and currency. The rest of the booklet was dedicated to the coming of the Avatar, chosen by the Ascended Masters to establish a new age of enlightenment. In this portion of the booklet, Doreal modestly states that, "I am only to be the voice, or forerunner, of the Avatar, who will appear on May 2nd, 1956 in America. This is the day when the present Earth cycle closes and the golden age of the 7th cycle will dawn." The Serpent People. In several of his booklets, Doreal warned of the Serpent People, a race nearly identical to Shaver's snake-headed Darrow, and a fantasy feature first popularized by Robert E. Howard's The Shadow People in a 1929 issue of Weird Tales. Like the Darrow, the Serpent People could shapeshift to look like humans. Extraterrestrials living inside the hollow Earth. In 1946, Dr. Maurice Doreal sent a letter to Amazing Stories, a science fiction publication which published his claims about having had personal contact with the Darrow, an evil extraterrestrial race that inhabits the inner hollows of inner Earth, and having visited their underground caverns. The underground cities of the hollow Earth. In his letter, he stated that the underground cities and caverns are, for the most part, protected by space warps, a science known to the ancients but only touched on by modern science. He goes on to say that many are wanting to enter these caves. However, it would be suicide for those who have not developed a protective screen, and anyone revealing their location would be a murderer. The Black Brotherhood of Evil Extraterrestrials. Mr. Doreal further claimed that in the outer world, the evil Darrow were represented by an organization known as the Black Brotherhood, whose purpose is the destruction of the good principle in man. A fair-skinned, blue-eyed race beneath the desert. In Mysteries of the Gobi, Doreal wrote of a civilization beneath the desert, inhabited by a highly advanced, benign race similar to Shaver's Tarot folks, but with one distinct difference. Gobians were the real Hebrews who became priests to the Jews, but were not Jews themselves because Jesus was not of the Jewish race, but descended from the Gobians who all had fair skin, blue eyes, and red or blonde hair. Doreal's shift of imagination to remain relevant. With the rise of alarming possibilities posed by nuclear warfare, UFOs, and the lingering saga of the Shaver mystery, Doreal's works began to shift focus in keeping with the issues of the time. The Serpent People have overthrown Joseph Stalin. By 1948, Doreal warned in his book entitled Flying Saucers: An Occult Viewpoint that the Serpent People had disposed of Joseph Stalin, and now the Supreme Council of the Soviet is controlled by beings far wiser than they appear. A nuclear holocaust that never materialized. Motivated to protect himself and his followers from the unfounded threat of nuclear holocaust, Doreal moved the Brotherhood of the White Temple from central Denver to the new Shambhala Ashrama compound in a rural area outside of Sedalia, Colorado. In a 1946 interview with Rocky Mountain News, Doreal is quoted as saying, "I had predicted atomic war years before it came. I saw atomic energy at work several years ago when the Dalai Lama of Tibet ushered me into the Great White Lodge, 75 miles below the Himalayas." In 1948, Doreal claimed to have met the current Dalai Lama's predecessor and stated that he knew when atomic weapons were about to be unleashed. The fallout shelter that might become a resort. Photographed wearing gold robes while seated on a silver throne that Doreal claimed was previously owned by the ill-fated Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, Doreal proclaimed that the Shambhala Ashrama compound was the new Shangri-La of the Rockies and the center of occult wisdom in the West. In 1953, the Shambhala Ashrama compound was finally finished. Doreal stated that the lead in the rocky walls of the surrounding canyon would protect residents from nuclear fallout, and if nuclear war didn't actually hit, the community could become a summer resort. Distorted misperceptions of reality go unrealized. In 1953, the Post said that The Voice had issued orders that no outsiders are permitted to enter the valley except necessary workmen. In 1953, a Wall Street Journal story reported that the leader of the cult predicts the attacks in May, August, or September. But months and then years, to include the former epic of the coming of the Avatar in 1956, passed with no further public pronouncements from The Voice. This concludes part 2 of this video series. Be sure to watch part 3 of The Emerald Tablets of Thoth The Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal?